Hello, friends, and welcome to Chapters on Armstrong Television, where we profile editors, authors, and publishers in the tri-state area, including West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, and sometimes Virginia. It's my pleasure to be your host again today. I'm Carter Seaton, and today we have with us Pete Kosky, a wonderful singer-songwriter-storyteller, and we're just delighted he's here. He is from South Charleston, West Virginia, and he's known for singing traditional ballads and songwriting. He has several CDs of original songs and ballads, and he plays the clawhammer banjo as well as, I guess, the guitar, and is a past winner of the West Virginia Liars Contest. That's an interesting title. In addition to performing at the Vandalia Gathering, he's also a regular at West Virginia folk festivals around the state. He teaches history in Kanawha County and lives in Charleston with his wife Ariana and his daughter Claire. His first collection of stories is Mountain Tales and River Stories, and the most recent collection, which we're going to talk most about today, is Mountain Tales 2. Both were published by Mountain State Press. Welcome, and it's our privilege to have you here today.
Well, thank you.
This book, Mountain Tales 2, is just chock full of wonderful stories. But before we talk about any of those, I want you to tell us a little bit about how you got interested in traditional Appalachian ballads and in songwriting.
Okay. Well, I always liked music, and I liked guitars, and I liked story songs. So when I was a little kid, my dad would play Johnny Horton and Johnny Cash and Marty Robbins, and I liked that stuff. So I was drawn to it. And then, when I was about 8 years old, we were at the Arts and Crafts Fair at Ripley.
Yeah.
And I heard David Morris, the ballad singer. And I heard other traditional singers.
Like
and then
Frank, George.
Well, Frank and Jane. Well, that's dedicated to Frank and Jane.
I know it is.
And
yeah.
also, I heard David later, too. I heard him a lot. So I was influenced by that. And then when I got to be about 16 or 17, I was at a camp out, and a guy was singing songs, and it was, I thought they were traditional, but he'd written them. And that gave me something clicked. So I wanted to start writing songs of my own. And I listened to a lot of songwriters, and I listened to a lot of old traditional ballads, anywhere I could find a source, and that kind of got me going
Yeah.
into it.
Where
And I
did you-
like history, too, so.
Yeah, apparently so, since you teach it.
Yeah.
Where did you learn to play the music? Besides just listening to them, is that, a lot of musicians learn from the elders, but did you take music lessons as well?
I started real guitar lessons when I was 11, and I had a guitar. And I'm actually, I write left-handed, but I play right-handed. But I was left-handed. I held the guitar, and the guitar teacher flipped it over. And I took lessons for a few months when I was 11, learned some chords, and then it kind of went dormant because the teacher moved away. Well, then in 7th grade at South Charleston Junior High, they had a guitar program, and I just, after that, I was playing guitar all the time. And then banjo, I'd been around the clawhammer banjo, ever since we started going to Vandalia Gathering. That's when I really started hearing it. And I never thought I'd ever really pick it up, but I just kind of picked it up. And I finally, some friends of mine, John Blizzard and other people, Tim Bing, Jim Mullins, they really showed me that. Once you get that right-hand lick, and I already knew a lot of tunes. And Brooks Smith, I learned from a man named, most of my tunes I learned from Brooks Smith. He was a World War II veteran. He passed away in 2007, and I used to go over to his house.
What about Elmer Berg? Was he one of your...
I met him one time,
Yeah.
but I had heard Elmer. But the connection I have with him in a way is there's two principal ways that people in West Virginia tune the banjo when they play in C, double C, and classical C. And about it's half and half. Well, I learned classical C style from Brooks Smith, which Elmer played that same tuning, and it makes it sound a little different. So there's and he does a lot of drop thumb, which Brooks did. So, but I am familiar with, and I've emceed so many at the West Virginia State Folk Festival, the contests. I run the fiddle and banjo contest, so I know a lot of those banjo players.
Yeah.
But I just love banjo.
It's a long tradition in West Virginia.
It is.
The music.
And you have to learn the banjo from someone. You can't learn it out of a book. That's the best part. Guitar is more accessible, but banjo, that's special.
Got to learn from one of the
Yes.
older
Somebody.
ones. Yeah, right. So that's why the Vandalia is certainly special, because they're all there.
And I got second in banjo last year at Vandalia, which made me really happy.
Oh, that's great.
That's
Good
a lot
for
of
you.
fun.
That's good. All right, so Your stories, many of them, are inspired by Appalachian ballads, and that's kind of a crossover, or a blending of the two things that you're
Yep.
interested in. Can you explain to us, and I know you talked about it being a child, some of them being the child ballads.
Yes.
Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, some of the stories in this book are based on child ballads. Now, child ballads are called the English and Scottish popular ballads. They were collected by a Boston scholar, Francis J. Child, in the 1880s, published in several volumes, and there was 305. They were kind of like the Brothers Grimm of the English English
Yeah.
tradition, you know. And many of those ballads, when he collected them, he just collected texts, and they're old, and they deal with royalty mostly, and a lot of them mostly are tragic. Well, of course, they were brought here by the Scotch-Irish, to Appalachia. So, actually, in the 20th century, most of those ballads had died out in Britain and Scotland, where they were collected and originally, and they were still being sung over here. But of course, they changed, they'd evolved, and they were now Appalachian, but of British origin. And so, some of the stories in this book, three of the ballads are used in this book. Bangham and the Wild Boar, which was called Sir Lionel, and the other one was Young Hennerly, or Love Hunting, and the other one was Blackjack Davy, or the Gypsy Laddie. So those are, and then I have another story based on an American ballad, The Banks of the Ohio.
Okay. All right, so when they came to this country, how did those ballads change? Did they change in the setting, so that they were more Appalachian
It
based?
evolved. It evolved over time. They got shorter. They weren't as long. They many of the motifs were still there, like Lily White Hand, things of that nature. The names changed a little. Like in England, Lord Daniel, the story of Musgrave, becomes Matty Groves, which may be changed to maybe related to Shady Grove. Barbara Allen is Barbary Allen or whatever. All those,
Right.
and they change. They get shortened. And in fact, I heard one version of it was Matty Groves, where in the English version there's a foot page that warns the Lord, a foot page, but in this one a little footpath, because who had a foot page in the mountains, right?
Yeah, right.
So that you had to take a footpath to find the Lord. So a lot of those colloquialisms became part of it,
I
and they
see.
got shorter too.
Right. All right, how about if you sing for us the ballad that is about the first story, or
Right.
that it's based on, inspired by, and then you tell us a little bit about
Okay,
that story.
you bet. This is one of my favorite old ballads, and it's called, in Appalachia, it's called Bangham and the Wild Boar. And Bangham is the name of a hunter who kills a boar. Originally, it was about an English knight who slays a giant boar and a bunch of other things, but it got whittled down. And this version was collected in Pocahontas County, the Hammonds family. They are a wild boar in these woods, diddle-o-dee, diddle-o-dee. They are a wild boar in these woods, diddle-o-dee. They are a wild boar in these woods. He'll eat your meat, he'll drink your blood. Come away, quaddle down, Quanzio. Old Bangham had a wooden gun, diddle-o-dee, diddle-o-dee. Old Bangham had a wooden gun, diddle-o-dee. Old Bangham had a wooden gun to shoot that wild boar as he run. Come away, quaddle down, Quanzio. Old Bangham tracked him to his den, diddle-o-dee, diddle-o-dee. Old Bangham tracked him to his den, diddle-o-dee. Old Bangham tracked him to his den. There lay the skull of 1,000 men. Come away, quaddle down, Quanzio. Old Bangham raised his wooden gun, diddle-o-dee, diddle-o-dee. Old Bangham raised his wooden gun, diddle-o-dee. Old Bangham raised his wooden gun. He shot that wild boar as he run. Come away, quaddle down, Quanzio. So
That's great. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I noticed when I read this that many of the stories involve killing, fighting, tragedy, Is that typical of the ballads?
The ballads are, yes. There's very few of the child ballads that are not tragic, unfortunately. I mean, you've got, those ballads have every human condition, frankly. You have mothers killing their children, you have brother killing a sister killing a sister, children killing their parents, plus other people killing people they don't know. And there's a lot of tragedy, and there's very few of them that are actually not tragic, and that's special when you find one. But the ones that, of course, that makes a better story if it's
Sure,
dramatic.
absolutely. Do you think that lends itself to the way that the older bluegrass songs and country
Yeah.
music, because they're not
They're
real
all-
happy either.
they're all
It's,
related.
Somebody's losing their truck or losing their girl
Well,
or being killed or something.
If you look at the early country singers, their repertoire of music when they grew up would have been some gospel music. It would have been some what we call Native American ballads, like the banks of the Ohio, ballads that were composed in the United States or the colonies, and ballads from the old world. And so all that blends together. And a lot of the bluegrass singers do sing child ballads. Most of them sing Barbara Allen, and some of them sing, in fact, Young Hennerly, which is another one mentioned in here. That was recorded by Charlie McCoy in West Virginia back in the 30s, I believe.
Wow,
So,
yeah.
yeah, that's...
Right. All right, so tell us a little bit about a couple of the other stories. For
Okay.
instance, the Gypsy Soldier of Big Sioux.
Okay, that is based on another child ballad, the Gypsy Laddie, I believe it's called. And I took that story. It's a story of a gypsy, or in some versions of the song, it's a band of gypsies, and they come to a castle originally, and they hypnotize the earl or the lord's lady and take her away. She goes away with them willingly, and the lord comes back, and he's incensed, and he tracks them down. And in many of the old versions, he kills all the gypsies. He hangs them or something. In the American versions, she gets away, and no one gets killed. So I took the story and had it set in Big Sioux area during the first few months of the Civil War, and that's where Lee's army was stationed, and all that. The beginning is real history, and then I have him being a deserter, and he meets up with this woman, and that that was fun.
I'm sure. It sounds to me like you had a great time doing all of these stories, taking what was maybe real or not real in the ballad, and then making your own version of it.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. How about The Lover's Return?
Oh, that's my take on the backstory of the old American song, Banks of the Ohio, which is the classic murder ballad where a man takes the woman down by the river and kills her, and you usually assume that she's pregnant. There's so many of those songs. So I have it set in the early 1970s, during the time of Watergate, actually. And his little boy on his farm, he's about 12, and goes fishing with his grandfather, and then he later finds out a dark secret about his grandfather. And I just had fun with that.
Right.
And also, that was inspired partly when I was a kid, about 10 years old. My dad and my brother and about 6 or 8 other guys, we canoed several miles down the Ohio River to a tributary on the West Virginia side. I don't know where it was. And we had flintlocks. We had muzzle loaders. We were camping primitive, and we found this rock house in this shady area of the creek, and it had all the blackened char from the fires. And I listened to those older guys talk about what they thought who was here and were the Indians here, and that kind of woven into that story as well.
Right. That's great. I have to ask you, as a former West Virginia champion liar,
Yes.
Have you told any of these stories as part of the
Yeah,
contest?
actually, wait a minute. I think so. In the first book, in my first book, one of the stories that I wrote in here was originally one of the lies.
I see.
The one called Moth and the Flickering Light about the Mothman. And I took that lie, the story I told, and I fleshed it out and made it into a story. That one I did. I don't think any of the others are.
Okay. Now, some of the stories are not based on a
Right.
ballad.
Yeah, actually, most of them are not.
Right. How about Between the Bridges? Is that from your youth
That's
by chance?
based on a true story that happened to me.
I thought it might be.
It was. On the first book, I have three or four stories about the Kanawha River and fishing, and they take place in the '80s when I was a teenager, and we all fished down there and had a ball. Well, one time there's a place in the Kanawha River. It's down just in Charleston. It's just downriver from Magic Island on the other side, and there's a sunken barge. It's been there for I don't know how long. It's got trees growing out of it. Well, when I was a kid, we sometimes would fish there, and it was fun to fish off that barge. We went down there one night, and there was a empty coal barge tied to it, and it was huge, high, empty. So there were these people that had a bonfire going, and they were getting drunk down there by the other end of the barge. So we got up on that barge and fished off it, you know. And I remember catching a big carp that night. Well, those guys started chopping that barge loose, and we jumped and got back. So I fictionalized that into a story, but that was based on something that happened to me,
Yeah, I thought it might have been.
and it was fun.
Yeah.
I mean, that made a good story.
Sure. Which one is your favorite?
In this new book,
Yes.
I really like the Wild Woman of the Woods, the first one, but I really like the Blue Mountains. I just think,
Tell us
and I
why.
like Popcorn Balls, and I like.
Tell us about the Blue Mountains.
The Blue Mountains is a story. I challenged myself for 2 weeks to write one story every night
Oh, wow.
when I got home from work, okay? And I would come home and I would write maybe 2 pages. I'd just write whatever came to my mind. And that story was about a page and a half. And I used to oil paint and watercolor paint a lot. My grandfather was an artist too, when I was young. So I wanted to write something about, it had art in it, and I also like the color of blue mountains in the distance, you know? So I wrote a story about this young man who used to be a painter, and he drives across the country and he sees the landscape in the eyes of artists. He sees it and he's in the Southwest, he sees George O'Keeffe, and when he's in the Appalachian Mountains, he sees Winslow Homer, and he sees Andrew Wyeth, and he sees Thomas Harspeth, Albert Bierstadt. And he comes to he's eternally searching, can't find what he wants. And he finds this little town somewhere in the mountains, and it was partly inspired by a place in Maryland I drove through once, actually, but it could be anywhere. And this has the mountains he likes, so he stays there, and he meets a woman who's married and has a waitress, and they have a unrequited relationship, I guess you would say. But I really enjoyed that story. But I showed the page and a half I wrote to Kat Pleska, the publisher, and she said, "You have to finish this, and you have to have him paint her like Andrew Wyeth painted Helga."
Yes.
And I was like, okay. So that's when and it's not a long story, but boy, I just really liked that one.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
I'll tell you what my favorite was.
Yes.
That's the Surreal Killers.
Okay.
Tell me about that story.
That-
Where
that-
did the inspiration for that come?
That's another one of the ones that I started one day after work, and I just thought I wanted to write something. And I'd been in my car driving, and I was late getting a cell phone in my life, okay? I had a flip phone for years. I hated it. I didn't like it. And my wife finally said, "You have to get an iPhone." And then my daughter said, "Well, you can download music on it." So I got to where I could download all this, and I've got traditional ballads, but I've got the Rolling Stones and stuff on there that So I was driving around one day and I was listening to Keith Richards and the Rolling Stones, and I thought, and I got an idea, because that fellow listens to that in the story. So, because I said, when I listen to this music, it makes me feel skinny and like I have hair again. So I put that in the story. And then I didn't know where I was going with it. And then, of course, he becomes I don't know how much you want to tell about it, but
Yeah, I don't want to tell this whole story, but
it does have a supernatural bent to it, and I thought it was a lot of fun to write.
yeah.
And I also was inspired by, whenever you watch a movie on TV or a DVD, there's a sign. 'Cause I show a lot of them at school, and there's always a sign that says Interpol, and you'll be investigated if you steal this movie. So I wanted to put Interpol into it, which I did. So I brought the Interpol supernatural whatever police to West Virginia.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, I'm glad you liked that story,
I did. I
because
loved it. Yeah.
it was kind of weird.
Yeah, and for a totally different reason, I loved the way you evoked the memories of an old home place in Popcorn
Oh,
Balls.
yes, thank
and
you.
the young man goes back to his grandmother's funeral.
Now that story
so beautiful.
was based a lot on when I was a kid. I had my mother was from northern Ohio, and I spent my summers at my grandfather's farm, and it was very rural. And my great-grandmother lived on a farm in the middle of nowhere, and she would make popcorn balls for us kids, just like in the story. It was my great-grandmother. And I was thinking about, and I thought, that's something nobody ever mentions anymore or talks about. And I said, I want to write something about popcorn balls. And a lot of the description of that place was a lot that's basically my grandfather's farm. And
Well, what I particularly liked was where you talk about the lounge chair that he sat in
Yes.
and the smell
the
of the
smell.
mentholatum.
Well, my grandfather was a farmer, and he farmed till he was 70. Physically couldn't farm anymore, but the farm he worked on he didn't own, he rented, so he had to move into town. All right, now he had bad circulation, so he thought that Bengay held in his body heat, so he would slather it all over him, and he'd put on long johns and 2 pairs of overalls, 2 pairs of socks, a sweater, and the chair he sat in, the lazy boy, the back of it was shiny with hardened Bengay. So you could smell, and he would turn the heat up to 90 in the winter because he didn't have so the house would smell like Bengay. So that's kind of what, I'm glad you caught that.
That's just, I
But
can,
you see,
I
that's
can smell it right now.
it's a fictional story, but it's based on
Yeah,
my experience.
absolutely.
Some of the stories I write I have no experience with, and you just
Right,
make things up.
Right. What is your writing method? What is your writing style? You talk about writing a story every night when you come home from work.
I did that for
Is
2 weeks.
Okay, for only 2 weeks.
Yes.
Okay. But in general, how do you
Well, I'll
approach
tell you,
writing?
I think about it, usually I think about it a long time before I do it. And this first book that came out in 2017, the first story I wrote in that book, I had been thinking about it for years, the idea. And I started writing that in August of 2015, and I wrote all the stories and finished them in December of 2015. So I was on a roll.
Yeah, you were.
Then I did not write for a year. Then from December to May, I wrote the second book.
Wow.
So that's kind of weird, but
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it, but I guess I had to. When I was on a roll, I was on a roll. And I have a fire pit behind my house, and I'd go out at night and light a fire, and that's where I'd think, and then I'd have to run in and start typing.
Do you do all your work on a computer?
I do now. The very first story, I wrote longhand because, and then I find that a computer just works better, and I can
Yeah.
save them.
Right.
It just makes sense.
Yeah. I used to do the same thing. I wrote in longhand on a legal pad with a pencil. And then eventually, when I
Now-
started writing nonfiction, I went to,
Yes. Now, I have written large sections of those stories while I was camping at my
Yeah.
cabin. I have no electricity. I'm to the lamp, and I'd write it with longhand. And
yeah. I will also say that besides the emotional tug of some of those stories, you've got a great sense of humor. The one about the slaw line,
oh yeah,
that,
but that's a tragic story.
well, yes, it is, but the idea of, above a certain line,
That's
people
true.
don't eat slaw on
That
their
is
hot
true,
dogs.
though.
I know.
And
I
they're
know.
kind of militant about it.
I know it.
Because I used to be a food service pioneer. I used to work in restaurants in Charleston, mom and pop ones, and by
Yeah.
God, you had to put the slaw on.
I know it. And I remember one time going to Cincinnati and asking for slaw on my hot dogs, and they
Oh,
looked at me
they-
like I was nuts.
I know. You get treated that way. The first time I ever even was aware of it was because I grew up playing Little League in Kanawha County, and by God, it was slaw.
Oh, sure.
But I was up in Lewis County at Jackson's Mill playing music, and we went up to get a hot dog, and the old ladies were just mean. They go, "You're above the slaw line." So my buddy made a deal with him. He went and bought a tub of slaw at Kroger's and gave it to him, and they gave him free hot dogs.
No kidding.
Although I don't
That's
like the
funny.
Kroger's slaw, I like it homemade.
Yeah, that's funny. That's
Well, I'm
funny.
glad you got a kick out of that.
Yeah. The other one that I thought was funny was the 8-point buck.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Now, that story, it's not only kind of humorous, but it's also pretty true. Because that was did you catch when I had the setting for that story?
I don't remember.
It was
no.
1961.
Okay.
I made it deliberately in the early 60s because I figured it would have been easier to take a kid into a bar.
Yes, absolutely.
And they had a dog in there, and nowadays, you know how it is. But I had a friend that had relatives in Texas. He's older than I am. And he said back in the 60s, he was down in Texas, and his uncles took him deer hunting, and they filled up their thermoses, and they put the guns in the truck, and they drove a couple miles to a beer joint, and he said they sat there all day and drank beer and gave him nickels and drove back and told the women they didn't see any deer. And I said, I'm going to make a story about that. But the thought of the 8-point showing him the buck was late. It came to me, and I said, I'm going to they're going to say, you're
they're
going to
gonna
see a
see
deer.
one, yeah.
And of course, the lady knows what's going on. That's
Yeah.
the best
Oh,
part
sure,
too.
absolutely,
And of
yeah.
course, it doesn't really cause any harm. And the kid gets to drive the truck. He's 12. He gets to
Right,
drive the truck.
right.
That's cool.
And now he can carry that same story on to his kids and his
And
grandchildren
a
eventually.
friend of mine at work read that, and he said, "That's the way I grew up down in McDowell County." He said, "Yeah." So I thought that was nice.
Yeah,
Did you like the one about the Elvis, the Pinnacle
Yeah,
Rock?
Yes, yes.
That's kind of,
Yeah,
and I got a kick out of that one too.
yeah. And the one where there's the fight in the bar.
Oh, now
I
that
mean,
one.
These stories are just wonderful,
Now, as a
Pete. I just-
musician, thank you so much. As
Yeah.
a musician, you know, I used to play from 9 to 1 at the Ramada Inn and do stuff like that. And you'd see little conflicts.
Yeah.
But I've never been involved in anything that bad. I did almost get in one, but I listened to all my musician buddies and all people tell me stories
I'll
throughout
bet,
the years
sure.
of all the situations, especially with guitars getting broken. And I said, I'm going to put that in one story.
Yes,
Now, the
right.
part in the Lafayette, Hotel Lafayette in Marietta,
Uh-huh.
I went there when I was about 10 with my dad for some reason, and I wanted to make one of them take place there. And there is really a room called the gun room, and it has all these muskets in it. So I thought that would be
That's
really funny.
great. That's great. All right, so now you surely haven't milked all your imagination or your
I hope
ballads
not.
or your stories. What's next?
Well, I'll tell you what I've been working on, but I have no idea if I'll ever finish it. Summer of 2018, I wrote an outline for a novel.
Ah,
It takes place in Pocahontas County. I sat on it for a whole year. I wrote it in July 2018. July 2019, I started to write it. I got the outline made. I've got 13,000 words in on it. I don't know. I kind of stopped and I'm sort of recharging. But as far as short stories, I have a bunch of outlines for several, but I really don't know. Because I'll tell you, I can't believe I've actually got 2 volumes of them. That's a lot of work.
it is.
And it's
It
a lot
is.
of thinking.
Yes.
And I've got to,
Right.
I think I have to recharge a little more. But I hope I do.
Well, yeah, I hope you do
If
too,
not, I'm
because-
proud that I've got 2.
Yeah, well, they're wonderful stories, and I hope people will enjoy them as much as I did. We could continue to talk forever about your stories and the images that they capture and the inspirations for them, but how about if you send us off with another song?
Sure. I'll play you that Blackjack Davy.
Okay,
Do
that
you want to
sounds
show them the
great.
covers of the books?
They will,
This
sure.
is
Yeah, we wanna hear
this
this
is an
one.
old ballad. It's Blackjack Davy. This is the Appalachian version.
Okay.
And I don't really know where I learned it. I think it's Carter family and Woody Guthrie.
Oh, okay.
Probably.
Sounds great.
Blackjack Davy rode through the woods, he sang so loud and gaily. Made the woods around him ring, he charmed the heart of a lady, charmed the heart of a lady. How old are you, my pretty little miss? How old are you, my honey? She answered with a foolish smile, I'll be 16 come Sunday, be 16 come Sunday. Will you go with me, my pretty little miss? Will you go with me, my honey? I'll take you far across the sea, where you never will want for money, never will want for money. She took off those high heel shoes made of the Spanish leather. She put on those low heel shoes and they rode off together, together they did ride. Late that night when the boss come home looking for his lady, one she pointed on the other side, she's gone with the Gypsy Davy, gone with the Gypsy Davy. Go saddle me the buckskin mare with the $100 saddle. Point out to me their wagon tracks, and after them I'll travel, after them I'll ride. Last night I slept in a feather bed with the sheets turned down so bravely. Tonight I sleep in a barren field beside the Gypsy Davy, beside the Gypsy Davy.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Really enjoyed that. It's been a real delight to have you here today. And we also want to thank the Inner Geek for providing us with their on-site support and remind you that books from many of the authors who have been on chapters are here at the Inner Geek, and we hope you'll use them to buy all of your books as well as those of our authors. And also remind you that if you like us on Facebook, on the chapters page, you can go back and look at all sorts of the interviews that have been on in the past. And that'll do it for today, and we thank you so much for being with us, and stay tuned. We'll be back another day.
Connect with Chapters via email. Write to lp4@zoom.email. Chapters has a Facebook page at Armstrong Chapters. Like, subscribe, and follow. All chapter episodes are available on YouTube. Visit Armstrong's YouTube channel. Follow Armstrong. And look for a playlist of all the chapter's programs.